The dust rose in lazy spirals behind Gabriel Harris's horse as he rode into Copper Creek, 8 years melting away with each familiar landmark. The old water tower still leaned slightly to the left. The church steeple still caught the afternoon sun just so. And McGrath's general store still had that crooked sign that old McGrath had sworn he'd fix come next spring, for as long as Gabriel could remember. But the town had grown. New buildings shouldered between the old ones. Fresh lumber still yellow against the weathered gray of the originals. The saloon had expanded, swallowing up what used to be Mrs. Henley's boarding house. There were more people, too, faces he didn't recognize. Children who hadn't been born when he'd left. Gabriel pulled his hat lower, hoping to avoid recognition until he was ready. The telegram in his vest pocket had already worn soft from his fingers worrying at it during the 3-day ride from Colorado. 4 words that had upended everything. Mother passed, come home. He'd been breaking horses for a ranch near Denver when it found him. Already 2 weeks late. 2 weeks. His mother had been in the ground for 2 weeks while he'd been laughing around campfires, unaware that the world had shifted beneath him. The smithy's hammer rang out its familiar rhythm, and despite himself, Gabriel turned his horse toward the sound. Some things, at least, stayed constant. The blast of heat hit him before he even dismounted, bringing with it the acrid tang of hot metal and coal smoke. Well, I'll be damned. Hank Morrison straightened from the anvil, his face splitting into a grin that quickly sobered. Gabriel Harris, heard you might be coming back. Gabriel swung down from his horse, his legs stiff from the long ride. Hank! He extended his hand, and the older man's calloused grip was unchanged, firm, honest, warm as the forge behind him. I'm sorry about your ma, Hank said, and the simple words hit harder than any flowery condolence could have. She was a fine woman, the finest. Gabriel nodded, not trusting his voice. He'd held himself together this long. He could manage a few more hours. When did it happen? He finally asked. 3 weeks back, come Sunday. Doc Wilson said her heart just gave out in her sleep, peaceful as could be. Hank wiped his hands on his leather apron. We tried to find you sooner, but... I know. Gabriel had made himself hard to find. That had been the point of leaving. I got the telegram. You staying at the house? The house. His mother's house. His childhood home. Gabriel hadn't thought that far ahead. Had only thought about getting here. I suppose so. Hank nodded slowly. She kept your room just as it was. Used to catch her in there sometimes, dusting things that didn't need dusting. He turned back to his work, giving Gabriel a moment to compose himself. You need anything, you let me know. Gabriel led his horse through town, each step heavier than the last. People recognized him now. He saw it in the double takes, the whispered conversations behind hands. News would travel fast. The prodigal son had returned, too late for redemption. The house sat at the end of Maple Street, just as he'd left it. The white paint was fresher, though, and the fence he'd helped his father build had been replaced with a newer one. The garden was immaculate. His mother had always found peace in her flowers. Even now, in late October, chrysanthemums bloomed in defiant bursts of yellow and orange. Gabriel stood at the gate for a long moment, his hand on the latch. The last time he'd walked through this gate, his mother had been standing on the porch, her face a map of disappointment and love. He'd promised to write. He'd managed 3 letters in 8 years. The front door was unlocked. It always had been. His mother believed in the goodness of people, even when life had given her plenty of reasons not to. The familiar scent hit him immediately, lavender and lemon oil. The ghost of 1,000 meals. The cedar chest in the hallway. Home. Everything was exactly where it should be. Yet the absence was everywhere. No humming from the kitchen, no creak of her rocking chair, no gentle, "Is that you?" floating through the rooms. The silence was a living thing, pressing against his eardrums. Gabriel set his saddlebags by the door and walked through the house like a man in a dream. The kitchen table still bore the marks from when he'd carved his initials at age 7. His father had tanned his hide for that. His mother's knitting sat in its basket by her chair, needles thrust through a half-finished scarf as if she'd just stepped away for a moment. His old room was indeed unchanged. The quilt she'd made for his 16th birthday still covered the narrow bed. His father's pistol still hung on the wall, the one thing of his the old man had left behind when he'd ridden off to find his fortune in California, and found a grave instead. Gabriel sat on the bed, and it creaked under his weight. He was no longer the skinny boy who'd left here. The window still looked out over the back pasture where he'd learned to ride, where his father had taught him to rope, where his mother had watched with her hand shading her eyes, pride and worry warring on her face. A soft knock at the front door pulled him from his reverie. He almost didn't answer. It wasn't ready for condolences and casseroles. But his mother had raised him better than that. The woman on the porch was about his age, with honey-colored hair pinned up neat and proper. She held a covered dish, and her dark blue dress was practical but well-made. There was something familiar about her eyes, a warmth that made him think of summer afternoons and church picnics. Mr. Harris. Her voice was soft but steady. I'm Ruby Wilson, Doc Wilson's daughter. I wanted to... She paused, seeming to really see him for the first time. Oh, you don't remember me, do you? I was quite a bit younger when you left. Pigtails and missing teeth. The memory clicked into place. Little Ruby Wilson, who'd followed her father on his rounds, who'd helped his mother with the church bazaar, who'd been all knees and elbows and enormous eyes. This composed woman bore little resemblance to that child. Miss Wilson, he managed. I apologize. It's been 8 years. She finished gently. A lot changes in 8 years. She lifted the dish slightly. Your mother used to bring us soup when anyone was sick. I thought, well, grief is its own kind of illness, isn't it? The kindness in her voice nearly undid him. He stepped aside to let her in, watched as she moved through his mother's kitchen with easy familiarity. She knew where the plates were, knew which drawer held the silverware. How many times had she been here while he was gone? Your mother was teaching me to quilt, Ruby said as she ladled what smelled like beef stew into bowls. Every Thursday afternoon. She said I had clever fingers but an impatient heart. A sad smile crossed her face. She was right about both. They ate in silence for a while. The stew was good-hearty and well-seasoned. Gabriel found himself hungrier than he'd realized. When had he last eaten a proper meal? She talked about you, Ruby said quietly. Not in a pining way, just with love. She understood why you left. Gabriel set down his spoon harder than necessary. Did she... Your father's death, the ranch failing, everyone expecting you to be him... Ruby met his eyes steadily. She said you needed to find out who Gabriel Harris was, not who everyone thought he should be. And what did I find? The bitterness in his voice surprised him. 8 years of drifting, cattle drives, breaking horses, poker games, and bar fights. I became nobody in particular. You became yourself, Ruby corrected gently. That's not nothing. He wanted to argue, but the fight went out of him. His mother would have said the same thing, in the same tone. How many conversations had Ruby absorbed in those Thursday afternoons? Tell me about the funeral, he said instead. Ruby's face softened. The whole town came. We had to move it from the church to the town square. Couldn't fit everyone inside. Mr. Thompson played his fiddle, Amazing Grace, and Shall We Gather at the River. The children from the school sang. She'd been teaching some of them to read, using the Bible and whatever books she could find. Gabriel didn't know. There was so much he didn't know. Reverend Matthews spoke about the parable of the lamp under a bushel, said your mother's light had shone on all of Copper Creek, that we were all better for having known her. Ruby paused. It was true, every word. The weight of it all, the grief, the guilt, the goodness of his mother that he'd turned his back on threatened to crush him. He pushed back from the table. needing air, needing space, needing something he couldn't name. "I should go," Ruby said, reading his mood with an intuition that seemed beyond her years. "But Mr. Harris Gabriel, you're not alone here. Your mother made sure of that. She wove herself into this town so thoroughly that we all carry pieces of her. When you're ready, you'll see." She gathered the empty dishes, washed them with quick efficiency, and left the rest of the stew on the stove. At the door, she turned back. "She left something for you. With my father, he'll bring it by tomorrow, if that's all right." Gabriel nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Ruby studied him for a moment, then did something unexpected. She reached out and briefly touched his arm. It was a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of understanding. "Welcome home, Gabriel," she said, and then she was gone, leaving only the lingering scent of her lavender soap and the warmth of human kindness in a house that had felt too empty. Gabriel stood in the doorway, watching her walk down Maple Street in the gathering dusk. For the first time in 8 years, he wondered if coming home might mean more than just returning to a place. Maybe it meant finding something he hadn't known he was looking for. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains his mother had tatted herself, casting familiar patterns across the kitchen floor. Gabriel had barely slept, spending most of the night wandering the house like a ghost haunting his own past. Every room held a memory sharp enough to cut. He stood now in the parlor, coffee growing cold in his hand, facing the mantelpiece that served as a shrine to their small family's history. His parents' wedding photograph, his father young and stern, his mother radiant despite the serious expression fashion demanded, a daguerreotype of himself at 5. Clutching a wooden horse his father had carved. Another of him at 12, already showing the stubborn set of jaw that would later drive him from this very room. The rocking chair by the window still bore the indentation of his mother's slight frame. How many hours had she spent there, needle flashing as she mended clothes or embroidered linens for other families to make ends meet? The arm of the chair was worn smooth where her hand had rested, and Gabriel found himself running his fingers over the same spot, trying to capture something that had already slipped away. He moved to her bedroom next, though he'd avoided it the night before. The door creaked on its hinges, a sound that used to warn him when she was coming to check if he'd done his chores. Her bed was neatly made with the double wedding ring quilt her own mother had sewn. Her Bible sat on the nightstand, ribbon marking a page in Psalms. Reading spectacles folded on top. When had she started needing those? The wardrobe held her few dresses, each one pressed and hung with care. Gabriel recognized the blue one she'd worn to church every Sunday, the gray wool for winter, the faded calico for every day. At the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, was her wedding dress. He'd seen her take it out sometimes, not with sadness but with a sort of quiet remembrance, running her work-roughened hands over the delicate fabric. On her dresser sat the music box his father had given her their first Christmas together. Gabriel wound the key and listened to the tinny melody, Beautiful Dreamer. His throat tightened. She'd played it every night before bed, the ritual as fixed as the stars. Behind the music box, he found a stack of letters tied with ribbon. His letters, all 3 of them, spread over 8 years. They were pitifully few, yet she'd saved them like treasures. He recognized his own awkward handwriting, could almost feel the guilt that had made each word so hard to write. He'd told her about the work, the places he'd seen, carefully leaving out the drinking, the fights, the aimless drifting from town to town. Even in his absence, he'd tried to be the son she wanted him to be. Beneath his letters was another stack, these in his father's hand. Gabriel hesitated, then untied the ribbon. They were from California, full of promises and plans. Soon, my darling Ellen, one read, I'll strike it rich and send for you and the boy. This land is full of gold just waiting to be found. The last letter was dated just 2 weeks before they'd received word of his death in a mining accident. Gabriel sank onto the bed, the letters scattered across the quilt. His father had left to find fortune and found death instead. His mother had stayed to hold together what remained and found a different kind of wealth in the life she'd built. And he'd run from both their shadows, becoming neither the ambitious dreamer nor the steadfast heart. A memory surfaced with sudden clarity the night before he left. They'd argued about money, about the ranch, about his drinking with the Garrett boys. His mother's voice, usually so gentle, had turned sharp with fear. "You're becoming just like him," she'd said, and the words had hit like a physical blow. "I'm nothing like him," he'd shouted back. "He left to chase dreams. I'm leaving to get away from them." Her face had crumpled then, and she'd reached for him. "Gabriel, please, you're all I have left." But he'd turned away, too young and too angry to see the pain behind her words, too proud to admit he was running not from his father's dreams, but from his own fear of failing to live up to them. Now, sitting in her room with the morning sun painting golden squares on the floor, Gabriel understood what he couldn't then. She hadn't been trying to cage him. She'd been trying to save him from the very wandering that had consumed 8 years of his life. He carefully refolded the letters and returned them to their place. In the drawer below, he found more treasures, a lock of his baby hair in an envelope labeled with his birth date, his first tooth, a drawing he'd made of their old dog, Rex, report cards from school showing middling marks he'd never been much for book learning, programs from Christmas pageants, spelling bees, the harvest dance where he'd first worked up the courage to dance with Mary Sullivan. Mary, he wondered what had become of her. Married, most likely, with children of her own. That life, the expected life of settling down with a local girl, taking over the ranch. Raising a family had felt like a noose tightening around his neck at 19. Now, at 27, it seemed like something precious he'd carelessly thrown away. The barn was his next pilgrimage. It stood empty now, their few animals sold off to pay debts, but the stalls still smelled of hay and horse, and initials were still carved into the beam where he'd marked his height each birthday. The last mark was from his 18th year. He'd grown 4 inches after that, but there'd been no one to measure against, no beam to mark. His father's tools hung on the wall, each in its designated place. The man might have been a dreamer, but he'd been orderly about it. Gabriel took down a hammer, testing its weight. He'd helped build these stalls, had learned to measure twice and cut once, to let the wood tell you its grain, to take pride in a job done right. Skills his father had taught him before gold fever had taken hold. In the corner stood his old saddle, the one he'd saved 3 summers' worth of odd jobs to buy. He'd taken a newer one when he left, selling this one being too much like admitting he was never coming back. His mother must have bought it back, kept it here waiting. The tack room held more ghosts, bridles and bits, curry combs and brushes, all clean and oiled as if horses might return tomorrow. On a shelf sat the jar of liniment his mother had made, her neat handwriting labeling it "for sore muscles, horse or man." He unscrewed the lid, and the pungent smell transported him back to countless evenings, rubbing down horses while his mother called him for supper. Behind the barn, the small cemetery plot held 3 graves now. His grandparents lay beneath simple stones, and beside them, fresh earth marked his mother's resting place. No stone yet, that would be his responsibility. Gabriel knelt in the dirt, not caring about his only good pants. "I'm sorry, Ma," he said to the mounded earth. "I'm so damn sorry." The words broke something loose in him. 8 years of careful control, of keeping his emotions locked away like his father's tools in their designated places, crumbled. He wept then, great gasping sobs that would have shamed him if anyone had been there to see. Wept for the mother he'd lost, for the years he'd wasted, for the man he'd failed to become. When the storm passed, he sat back on his heels, spent. The sun was higher now, warming his back. A meadowlark called from the pasture, the same liquid notes he'd wakened to as a boy. Life went on, indifferent to grief, beautiful in its persistence. Gabriel rose, dusting off his knees. There was work to do. The house needed repairs. He'd been ignoring loose boards on the porch, shutters hanging crooked, paint peeling from neglect. His mother had done her best, but some jobs needed a man's strength. He might not be able to make up for 8 years of absence, but he could start with this. He returned to the barn for tools, rolling up his sleeves with purpose. As he selected what he needed, he found himself talking to his father's ghost. "You taught me to build things right," he said to the empty air. "Maybe it's time I remembered how." The physical work felt good, focusing his mind on immediate problems with straightforward solutions. Measure, cut, nail, sand, prime, paint. By afternoon, he'd repaired the porch steps and started on the shutters. His hands remembered the rhythm, found satisfaction in the solid thunk of hammer on nail. When Ruby Wilson appeared at the gate with another covered dish and her father in tow, Gabriel was balanced on a ladder, sweat soaking his shirt despite the cool October air. He watched her take in the repairs with an approving nod. "Ma always said idle hands were the devil's workshop," he called down. "Your mother was a wise woman," Doc Wilson replied, his medical bag in one hand and a leather portfolio in the other. "Might you come down? I have some things to discuss." Gabriel descended, wiping his hands on his pants. The doctor looked older, grayer, but his eyes were still sharp behind wire-rimmed spectacles. They sat on the newly repaired porch steps, Ruby tactfully disappearing inside with her dish. "Your mother came to me 3 months ago," Doc Wilson began without preamble. Her heart had been giving her trouble, though she didn't want folks to know, stubborn as a mule about taking it easy. He smiled sadly. "Said she had too much living yet to do." Gabriel's hands clenched. 3 months. While he'd been breaking horses in Colorado, she'd been dying. She knew her time was limited. The doctor continued. "That's when she gave me this." He handed over the portfolio. "Her will, some legal papers, and a letter for you. Said I'd know when to deliver it." Gabriel took the portfolio but didn't open it. Not yet, not with the doctor watching. "She also asked me to tell you something." Doc Wilson cleared his throat. "She said you were to stop carrying weight that wasn't yours to bear. Said you'd understand." And he did. His father's dreams, his mother's hopes, the town's expectations, he'd shouldered them all until they'd driven him away. Even in her final message, she was trying to set him free. "Thank you," Gabriel managed. The doctor rose, patting Gabriel's shoulder with a father's kindness. "You take your time with that letter. Son, Ruby will see I get home." He paused at the gate. "Your mother was one of the finest people I've known, but don't mistake that for sainthood. She was human, made mistakes, had regrets. She'd want you to remember her whole, not perfect." After they'd gone, Gabriel sat alone on the porch as shadows lengthened across the yard. The portfolio lay heavy in his lap, but he wasn't ready yet. Instead, he looked out over the land that had shaped him, the house that had sheltered him, the ghosts that had driven him away and called him home. Tomorrow, he would read his mother's last words. Tomorrow, he would face whatever truths she'd left behind. But tonight, he would simply sit where she'd sat, watch the stars appear one by one, and try to forgive himself for taking 8 years to learn what she'd always known. Sometimes the hardest journey is the one that brings you back to where you started. The knock came just after sunrise, gentle but persistent. Gabriel had been awake for hours, sitting at the kitchen table with his mother's letter still unopened before him. He'd made coffee 3 times, letting each pot grow cold as he stared at her familiar handwriting on the envelope. Ruby Wilson stood on the porch, a basket over her arm and an apologetic smile on her face. The morning light caught the gold in her hair, making her look younger than her years. "I know it's early," she said, "but I wanted to catch you before the town woke up. Thought you might appreciate some breakfast without the whole of Copper Creek stopping by to pay their respects." She was right. Yesterday, he'd glimpsed curtains twitching as news of his return spread. It wouldn't be long before the parade of well-meaning neighbors began. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. "Coffee's fresh, for once." She moved through the kitchen with that same easy familiarity, unpacking biscuits still warm from her oven, a jar of preserves, fresh butter, and thick slices of ham. "I hope you don't mind," she said, glancing at the unopened letter. "I can leave if you'd rather be alone." "No." The word came quick, surprising him. "No, stay, please." They prepared breakfast together in comfortable silence. Ruby scrambled eggs while Gabriel sliced bread, their movements coordinated without discussion. It reminded him of helping his mother in this same kitchen, the simple rhythm of shared work. "You knew her well," he said finally, as they sat to eat. "These last years." Ruby spread preserves on a biscuit, considering her words. "She became like a second mother to me after mine passed. Did you know about that? My mother—" Gabriel shook his head. Another thing that had happened in his absence. "Consumption, 4 years ago. Papa did everything he could, but—" She shrugged, a gesture that held volumes. "Your mother appeared at our door the day after the funeral with a pot of soup and absolutely no patience for our protests. Before we knew it, she was coming by twice a week, teaching me everything my mother hadn't had time to." "That sounds like her," Gabriel said softly. "She taught me to cook, to sew, to keep house properly. But more than that, she taught me to see people, really see them." Ruby's eyes met his. "She said everyone carries invisible burdens, and the kindest thing we can do is lighten them when we can." Gabriel felt the weight of his own invisible burdens, accumulated over 8 years of running. "What else did she teach you?" A smile played at Ruby's lips. "To make biscuits that could make a man propose marriage, to read the weather in cloud formations, to know when someone needed talking to and when they needed silence, to plant marigolds with tomatoes to keep the bugs away." She paused, her expression growing tender. "To forgive people who couldn't forgive themselves." The last hit too close to home. Gabriel pushed back from the table, moving to the window. "I don't deserve forgiveness." "Deserving has nothing to do with it," Ruby said quietly. "That's what makes it grace." He turned to look at her, this woman who was both stranger and strangely familiar. She sat in the morning light, hands folded in her lap, radiating a calm that seemed beyond her years. How had little Ruby Wilson, all knees and elbows and missing teeth, become this pillar of quiet strength? "Tell me about her last days," he said, returning to the table. "Not the dying, the living." Ruby's face lit up. "Oh, she was something, even with her heart troubling her. She insisted on teaching the Garrett children their letters, said if those boys could learn to read, they might make something of themselves instead of ending up like their father. She organized a quilting bee for Widow Harper, whose roof had leaked and ruined her bedding. She mediated the dispute between Mr. Clark and Mr. Preston over the property line, had them both over for coffee and pie until they were too full of sugar to stay angry. Gabriel found himself smiling despite the ache in his chest. She always did believe pie could solve most problems. The week before she passed, she had me help her put up preserves, insisted on making extra for the church pantry, even though I could see she was tired. Ruby's voice wavered slightly. She said idle hands might be the devil's workshop, but busy hands were God's way of letting us help him tend the world. They sat quietly for a moment, remembering. Then Ruby straightened, her practical nature reasserting itself. She also left instructions, quite a few of them. "Actually, would you like to know?" Gabriel nodded, though part of him feared what organizational forces his mother might have set in motion from beyond the grave. Ruby counted on her fingers. "First, the garden needs to be maintained. She's already arranged for the Hendricks boy to help with the heavy work, and she's paid him through winter. Second, her preserves and pickles in the cellar are to be distributed to families in need. She left a list. Third, her good china is to go to the church for social functions. Fourth, her sewing basket and fabric are mine, if I want them." She paused, color rising in her cheeks. "And fifth, someone needs to look after her son until he remembers how to look after himself." She said that. Her exact words were, That boy never could remember to eat regular when he got caught up in something. Make sure he doesn't waste away while he's figuring out what comes next." Gabriel laughed, surprising himself. It felt rusty but real. Still managing everything, even now. Especially now. Ruby agreed. "She knew you'd come home. Never doubted it for a moment. I almost didn't get the telegram in time. But you did. That's what matters." Ruby began clearing the dishes, waving off his attempt to help. "She also left something else. Wait here." She disappeared into the parlor. Returning with a wooden box, Gabriel recognized immediately. His father had made it for his mother's birthday the year before he'd left for California. The wood was cherry, polished to a deep glow, with her initials carved on the lid in his father's careful script. "She said you'd know what to do with these," Ruby said, setting the box before him. Inside, nestled in velvet, lay his parents' wedding rings, his mother's thin gold band, worn smooth by years of work, his father's thicker ring, barely worn at all. Beneath them, a piece of paper with his mother's writing, "For when you find your way home, not to a place, but to a person." Gabriel's throat closed. Even in death, she was matchmaking. He glanced at Ruby, wondering if she knew what the box contained, but her expression was innocently curious. "Just some family things," he said, closing the lid. Would you like to see the garden? I could use advice on what needs doing." They spent the morning walking the property, Ruby pointing out what needed harvesting, what should be cut back for winter, what would bloom again come spring. She knew every plant, every secret corner where his mother had coaxed beauty from the soil. "She grew herbs here for medicine," Ruby explained, indicating a raised bed near the kitchen door. "Feverfew for headaches, echinacea for colds, chamomile for sleep. Said a garden should feed the body and heal it too." In the orchard, the apple trees were heavy with fruit. "These need picking soon," Ruby said, reaching up to test one. "Your mother usually made cider, apple butter, dried rings for winter. The church always counted on her apple contributions for the harvest festival." "When is that?" 2 weeks. Will you still be here?" The question hung between them. Would he'd come for a funeral, but what kept him now? "I don't know," he answered honestly. "I've got nothing waiting for me elsewhere, but I'm not sure I belong here anymore either." Ruby studied him with those direct eyes. "Belonging isn't about deserving or earning. Sometimes it's just about choosing to stay." They moved through the rest of the garden, Ruby sharing memories with each plant, each tree. His mother lived in every story, teaching, helping, nurturing. She'd transplanted herself as surely as her perennials, setting down roots that would bloom long after she was gone. "This was her favorite spot," Ruby said finally, stopping beneath the old cottonwood at the property's edge. A rope swing still hung from one massive branch, the wood seat weathered but solid. She'd come here in the evenings sometimes, just to sit and watch the light change. Gabriel touched the rope, remembering. His father had hung this swing when Gabriel was 5, his mother laughing as she took the first ride, skirts flying. Later, as a boy, he'd spent hours here, pumping his legs toward the sky, feeling like he could fly if he just went high enough. "She talked about you here," Ruby continued. "Not sad things. Stories about when you were young. The time you tried to adopt every stray dog in town. When you saved up to buy her a store-bought hat for her birthday. How proud she was when you won the roping competition at 15. Each memory was a small gift and a sharp pain. I thought she'd be disappointed in how I turned out." "She said you were like this tree," Ruby said, placing her hand on the cottonwood's deeply grooved bark. "Strong enough to stand on your own, but better for being rooted deep. Said you just needed time to grow into your own shade." Gabriel leaned against the trunk, looking up through branches that had sheltered generations. His mother's understanding reached beyond death, offering comfort he hadn't known he needed. "She sounds like she was better off these last years," he said finally. "With friends like you, the town caring for her, maybe it was better I stayed away." Ruby's hand on his arm was warm and unexpected. She was happy, she said firmly. But there was always an empty chair at her table, a portion of her heart that was wherever you were. Her joy would have been complete with you here. Don't dishonor her love by thinking otherwise. The tears came then, silent but flowing. Ruby didn't try to comfort him with words, just stood there, her hand on his arm, anchoring him to the present while he grieved for the past. When he'd composed himself, they walked back to the house in companionable silence. At the gate, Ruby turned to him. "The funeral is hard," she said, "but sometimes harder is learning to live with the absence. If you need anything company, silence, more biscuits, you know where to find me." "Ruby," he called as she started down the street. "Thank you, for everything, for being here for her when I wasn't." She smiled, and for a moment he saw his mother's spirit shining through that same combination of strength and tenderness, practicality and grace. She was here for me too. That's how love works. It multiplies. After she left, Gabriel finally opened his mother's letter, sitting in her chair by the window where the light was best. Her handwriting was shakier than he remembered, but the words were clear. "My dearest Gabriel," it began. "If you're reading this, then you've come home, just as I always knew you would." The letter was long, full of love and forgiveness and gentle wisdom, but it was the last paragraph that broke him completely. "I've had a good life, son. Not the one I imagined as a young bride, but rich in ways I couldn't have foreseen. My only regret is not telling you sooner that you were already everything I hoped you'd be. You just needed to discover it for yourself. Welcome home, my love. Now find someone to share it with." Gabriel folded the letter carefully, holding it against his chest. Outside, Ruby's figure was just disappearing around the corner. His mother's box sat on the table, holding promises for a future he was only beginning to imagine. And somewhere in the distance, church bells began to ring, calling the faithful to Sunday service, calling the wanderers home. The morning of the funeral dawned clear and cold, with the kind of crisp autumn air that made the world seem sharper, more defined. Gabriel stood before his mother's mirror, struggling with his string tie. His hands, so steady with rope and reins, trembled as he worked the unfamiliar knots. A knock at the door interrupted his efforts. Hank Morrison stood on the porch, dressed in his Sunday best, hat in hand. "Thought you might want company walking to the church," Hank said simply. "Sometimes a man shouldn't be alone." Gabriel nodded, grateful beyond words. As they walked through town, others joined them. Tom Garrett sober for once, old Mr. Peterson leaning on his cane. The Hendricks family with all 6 children scrubbed and solemn. By the time they reached the church, Gabriel found himself at the head of a silent procession. But Hank had been wrong about one thing: they couldn't fit everyone in the church. People spilled out onto the steps, filled the churchyard, lined the street. Gabriel stopped, overwhelmed by the sea of faces. "Your ma touched a lot of lives," Hank said quietly. Reverend Matthews met them at the door, his aged face kind. "We've moved the service to the town square," he said. "Ellen would have wanted everyone to be included." They'd set up a platform near the old elm tree, chairs for the family and elderly. Gabriel found himself in the front row, Ruby somehow beside him, Doc Wilson on his other side. The coffin, plain pine as his mother would have wanted, sat before them covered in wildflowers, not store-bought arrangements, but bouquets picked from gardens all over town. The service began with Rock of Ages, voices rising in imperfect harmony. Gabriel couldn't sing, his throat too tight, but Ruby's clear soprano carried the words for both of them. Her hand found his, a small anchor in the storm of grief. Then people began to speak. Mrs. Clark went first, her thin voice carrying surprising strength. "Ellen Harris taught me to read when I was 43 years old," she said. 43, and I'd been too ashamed to tell anyone I couldn't. She never made me feel foolish. just said it was never too late to learn something new. Tom Garrett's mother stood next, a faded woman who'd borne too much. When my husband left us, Ellen showed up with a month's worth of groceries and a list of folks who needed sewing done. "You're good with a needle, Martha," she said. "Time to put it to use." She got me enough work to keep us fed until I could stand on my own feet. One by one they came forward. The blacksmith whose son she'd nursed through scarlet fever. The young couple she'd helped reconcile after a bitter fight. Children she'd taught. Not just letters, but kindness. Families she'd fed. Hearts she'd mended. Lives she'd touched in ways small and large. Samuel Chen, who ran the laundry, spoke in halting English about how she'd been the first to welcome his family to town, bringing tea and teaching his wife enough English to navigate the shops. "She say we all same under sky," he managed. "All need friend." The stories painted a picture of a woman Gabriel recognized yet hadn't fully known. While he'd been chasing horizons, she'd been building a legacy of love, one small act at a time. Young Timothy Hendricks, all of 12 years old, climbed the platform last. "Mrs. Harris taught me to read," he said, voice cracking. "But more'n that, she taught me I was worth teaching. She said every person has a light inside, and books help it shine brighter." He pulled a worn primer from his pocket. "She gave me this. Said someday I'd teach someone else. I promise I will. Mrs. Harris, I promise. Reverend Matthews spoke then about the parable of the loaves and fishes, how one woman's small acts of kindness had multiplied to feed a multitude. But Gabriel barely heard the words. He was seeing his mother clearly for perhaps the first time, not just as his parent, but as a complete person who'd chosen to transform her grief into grace. When they sang, "Shall We Gather at the River?" Mr. Thompson's fiddle joining the voices, Gabriel finally found his voice. Ruby squeezed his hand as he sang the words his mother had hummed while working, the promise of reunion that had sustained her through loss. The procession to the cemetery was long, winding through streets lined with more people. At the grave, beside his grandparents and the marker for his father's empty grave, they lowered her into the earth. Gabriel threw the first handful of dirt, the finality of it striking him like a physical blow. "Dust to dust," Reverend Matthews intoned. But Gabriel heard his mother's voice instead. "From the earth we come, to the earth we return. But what grows from that earth feeds the world." After the burial, the town reconvened at the church hall. Tables groaned under the weight of food. It seemed every family had brought something. Gabriel found himself in a receiving line, accepting condolences, hearing more stories, seeing his mother reflected in 100 acts of kindness. "She paid for my boy's medicine when he was sick," one man whispered, pressing Gabriel's hand. "Never told anyone, but I knew. Sat with me all night when my Sarah was dying," an elderly woman said. "Didn't say much, just held my hand. It was enough." The stories blurred together, a tapestry of grace woven through the community. Gabriel began to understand what Ruby had meant. His mother had transplanted herself so thoroughly that she'd become part of the town's very foundation. As the crowd finally thinned, Gabriel found himself outside, needing air. He sat on the church steps, exhausted by grief and revelation. Ruby found him there, 2 plates of food balanced in her hands. "You haven't eaten," she said, settling beside him with a rustle of black silk. "Your mother would scold us both." They ate in companionable silence, watching the sun slant low across the square. The town was returning to normal, shops reopening, children playing, life continuing its relentless forward motion. "I never knew," Gabriel said finally. "All those people, all those stories. I thought she was just my mother, living a small life in a small town." "There's nothing small about changing lives," Ruby said gently. "Your mother understood something important, that kindness multiplies. Every person she helped went on to help others. Look at Timothy Hendricks. He'll teach someone to read someday, and they'll teach someone else, and on and on." Your mother planted seeds that will bloom for generations. Gabriel thought about his own life, the drifting, the aimlessness, the careful avoidance of connections. I've planted nothing, built nothing, left nothing behind but dust.
That's not true.
Ruby's voice was firm.
I heard cowboys talking at the service, men who'd worked with you on drives. They spoke of your fairness, your skill with horses, how you'd share your last biscuit with a hungry hand. You've planted more than you know, you just never stayed to see what grew.
The church bell tolled the hour, its bronze voice carrying across the town. Gabriel looked at the woman beside him, really seeing the strength in her jaw, the kindness in her eyes, the way she held herself with quiet dignity despite her own losses. "Why did you sit with me today?" he asked. "You could have sat with anyone." "Your mother asked me to," Ruby said simply. "The last time I saw her, she said you'd need a friend when you came home, someone who understood loss but hadn't let it make them bitter. She thought we might help each other heal." Even in death, his mother was matchmaking. But for once, Gabriel didn't mind her meddling. There was something about Ruby Wilson that calmed the restless spirit that had driven him for 8 years. "Would you walk with me?" he asked impulsively. "I'd like to see the town through her eyes, through yours." They walked as evening fell, Ruby showing him the invisible network of his mother's influence, the library corner in the schoolhouse she'd helped establish, the bench outside the mercantile where she'd held informal reading lessons, the houses where her preserves and quilts and quiet counsel had made the difference between despair and hope. At the edge of town, they paused at a small house Gabriel didn't recognize. "The widow Chen lives here now," Ruby explained. "After Mr. Chen died last winter, your mother organized the women to help her start a seamstress business. She's the best in 3 counties now for fine work." Through the window, Gabriel could see a woman bent over bright silk, her needle flashing in lamplight, creating beauty from remnants. Just as his mother had created community from individual acts of care. "She was never alone, was she?" Gabriel asked. "Even with me gone, she was never alone." "No," Ruby agreed. "She had the whole town as family, but she missed you. Not in a pining way, but like you'd miss a part of yourself. She was complete, but she'd have been more complete with you here." They turned back toward home when Hattie started thinking of it as home again, and Gabriel felt something shifting inside him. The wanderlust that had driven him for 8 years was quiet, replaced by something he couldn't yet name. At his gate, Ruby paused. "Thank you for today, for letting me share in remembering her." "Thank you for showing me who she really was," Gabriel replied. "I thought I knew her, but I only knew one facet of the diamond." Ruby smiled, sad and sweet. "She said the same about you once, that you were like a diamond, different faces catching the light differently, but all part of the same precious stone. She couldn't wait to see which facet would catch the sun when you found your way home." After she left, Gabriel sat on the porch in the gathering dark. The house behind him was empty, but not hollow, too full of memory and meaning for that. The town spread before him, windows lighting one by one like stars coming out, each representing lives his mother had touched. He thought about Timothy Hendricks with his precious primer, about Widow Chen with her flashing needle, about all the seeds of kindness planted and tended and blooming still. His mother's funeral had shown him that death wasn't an ending but a transformation, love changing form but never diminishing. Tomorrow, he would begin sorting through her things, deciding what to keep and what to share. He would visit the stonemason about a proper marker, something that captured who she'd really been. He would write to the ranch in Colorado, officially ending that chapter of his life. But tonight, he would simply sit where she'd sat, seeing the town through her eyes, understanding at last that coming home meant more than returning to a place. It meant choosing to become part of something larger than himself, adding his thread to the tapestry she'd begun. And perhaps, he thought, catching sight of a familiar figure passing beneath a street lamp, it meant allowing someone else to help him find which facet of himself would catch the light. His mother, even in death, was still teaching him that love multiplied when shared, that kindness created its own inheritance, and that sometimes the greatest adventures happen not on distant horizons but in the quiet corners of the heart. 3 days after the funeral, Doc Wilson appeared at Gabriel's door carrying his medical bag and a wooden box worn smooth with age. The morning was gray with the promise of rain, matching Gabriel's mood as he sorted through his mother's belongings. "May I come in?" the doctor asked, though he was already stepping inside with the authority of a man who'd walked these floors countless times. "There's something we need to discuss." Gabriel led him to the kitchen, automatically starting coffee. The house had begun to feel different, less like a memorial and more like a home waiting to be lived in again. "Your mother came to see me last spring," Doc Wilson began, setting the box on the table but keeping his hands folded over it. "She knew her heart was failing, though she refused to slow down. Stubborn woman." He smiled fondly. "She made me promise to give you this, along with her letter." The box was cherry wood, different from the one Ruby had brought. This one showed years of handling, corners rounded, the grain dark with oil from countless fingers. "This was your father's," the doctor continued. "She kept it locked away for years, but toward the end, I'd find her with it open, touching whatever's inside. She said when you came home, and she never doubted you would, you needed to understand the whole story." Gabriel's hand hesitated over the lid. His father remained a complicated ghost, the man who'd taught him to ride and rope, who'd built their furniture with patient hands, who'd left them both for a dream of gold. "Did you know my father well?" Gabriel asked. "I did. Joseph was a good man who made one terrible choice. But that's not the whole of who he was." Doc Wilson stood. "I'll leave you to it. But Gabriel read your mother's letter first. She wanted things understood in the right order." "Alone." Gabriel pulled out the envelope marked with his name in his mother's careful script. The paper was fine stationery, not her usual practical choice. Inside, her handwriting flowed across several pages. "My dearest Gabriel, if Doc Wilson has kept his promise, you're holding your father's box. I've carried it locked these 8 years, just as I've carried the truth. But secrets, like seeds kept from soil, serve no purpose. It's time you knew everything. Your father didn't leave us for gold. He left to save us from shame. The summer before he went to California, there was a drought. You remember the corn withered? The creek ran low. We borrowed against the ranch to buy feed, to keep the stock alive. Your father signed papers with Mr. Hollingsworth at the bank, trusting a man he'd known since childhood. But the papers weren't what Hollingsworth claimed. Instead of a simple loan, your father had signed away rights to our land if we couldn't pay in full by winter's end. When we realized the deception, it was too late. Hollingsworth had already filed the documents in the county seat. Your father confronted him. You know his temper when roused, but Hollingsworth had the law on his side. Even if not righteousness, he offered your father a devil's bargain: leave town quietly. Let folks think gold fever had taken him, and Hollingsworth would tear up the papers, stay and fight, and he'd take everything, leaving us with nothing but scandal. Your father chose to save us. He left believing it was temporary, that he'd find enough gold to return, pay off Hollingsworth, and reclaim his place. His letters promised as much, each one more desperate than the last, as California's promise turned to California's lie. When word came of his death, Hollingsworth appeared at our door within the week. But I was ready. Your father had written of another man who'd been cheated, a lawyer named Richardson. I'd contacted him, sent copies of everything. When Hollingsworth came to collect, I had law of my own. The ranch was saved, but at such cost. The town believed your father a dreamer who'd abandoned his family. You believed it too, and that broke my heart worse than losing him. But I couldn't tell you the truth. You were so young, so angry. I feared you'd do something rash, end up like him. Perhaps I was wrong. Perhaps protecting you from the truth only drove you to run from a lie. But we do our best with the love we have and the wisdom we lack. In the box, you'll find his letters, all of them, not just the ones I showed you before. You'll find the original papers from Hollingsworth, and Richardson's letters that saved us. You'll find the telegraph saying where they buried him, and the watch they sent back, the one I gave him on our wedding day. But most important, you'll find his last letter to you. He wrote it the night before the accident, though it never made it to the mail. A fellow miner sent it with his effects. I've kept it sealed these 11 years. It belongs to you. I've lived with this truth like a stone in my chest, smoothed by years but never diminished. Now I pass it to you, not as a burden but as freedom. Your father was flawed, quick to anger, too trusting, proud to a fault. But he loved us more than gold, more than pride, more than life. As do I love you, my son. Whatever you choose to do with this truth, know that both your parents' greatest wish was for you to live free of the chains that bound us: debt, deception, and the terrible cost of sacrifices made in shadow. Come into the light, Gabriel, it's time. All my love, Mother. Gabriel set the letter down with shaking hands. Everything he'd believed, every resentment he'd nursed, every bitter thought about his father's abandonment, all built on a foundation of protective lies and noble sacrifice. The box opened easily, its contents exactly as his mother had described. His father's letters, different now with context. Not the writings of a gold-drunk dreamer, but a desperate man trying to save his family. The legal papers, Hollingsworth's trap laid bare in fading ink, Richardson's correspondence, detailed and damning. At the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, lay the watch and the sealed letter. Gabriel held the watch first, remembering it on his father's vest, the way he'd checked it with unconscious habit. The inscription was worn but readable: to Joseph, my time is yours. Ellen. The watch had stopped at 3:17 the moment his father's time had ended. The letter was harder. His name was written across it in his father's bold hand, the seal unbroken all these years. Gabriel stared at it for long minutes before sliding his finger under the wax. My son, it began, and Gabriel had to stop, overwhelmed by hearing his father's voice across the years. My son. Tomorrow we go into a new shaft Thompson thinks shows promise. I'm sending this tonight in case, well, a man should say things while he can. I know you hate me for leaving. Your mother writes that you're angry, breaking things, picking fights. Good. Anger means you're alive, means you care. Use it, but don't let it use you. I failed you, Gabriel. Not by leaving, that was the one right thing I did, though you can't see it now. I failed by not teaching you sooner that a man's worth isn't in never falling, but in what he does after he's down. Hollingsworth knocked me down, and I ran. Maybe that makes me a coward, but I'd rather be a live coward working to fix things than a dead hero who left his family with nothing but pride to eat. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it home, but you're still there, and that's what matters. Take care of your mother. She's stronger than both of us, but even iron needs tending. Don't trust easy. I did, and it cost us dear. But don't stop trusting entirely either. The world has more good men than bad. They're just quieter about it. Learn from my mistakes. When a deal sounds too good, it is. When a man won't look you in the eye, there's a reason. When your gut says something's wrong, listen. But also remember the good, teaching you to rope, watching you gentle your first horse, seeing you read your first words. You were my pride. Son, are my pride. Wherever I am when you read this. I dream of coming home with gold enough to buy our ranch twice over, to spit in Hollingsworth's face, to earn your forgiveness. But if that dream dies with me, know this: you were worth every sacrifice. You and your mother were the only gold I ever really wanted. Live well, Gabriel. Live free. Live without the weight of other men's deceits on your shoulders. Your father, Joseph Harris. P.S. There's a place where we used to fish, where the creek bends and the cottonwoods make shade. I buried a box there before I left nothing valuable. Just some things I wanted safe. If I don't come back, they're yours. Gabriel read the letter 3 times, each pass revealing new layers. His father emerged not as the selfish dreamer he'd imagined, but as a man caught in an impossible situation who'd chosen his family over himself. The rain had started, pattering against the windows. Gabriel gathered the papers, needing air, needing movement. He saddled his horse and rode to the creek, to the bend where cottonwoods made shade. The landmarks were older, fuller, but still recognizable. It took an hour of searching, but he found it, a metal box wrapped in oilcloth, buried beneath a distinctive rock, inside his father's pocket knife, the one Gabriel had coveted as a boy. A piece of quartz shot through with what might have been gold, a photograph of the three of them at the county fair, Gabriel on his father's shoulders, his mother laughing, and a deed not to land but to a small claim in California, properly filed and legal. In case we need to start over, a note read, "Sometimes a man needs options." Gabriel sat in the rain, holding these pieces of a man he'd never really known. Joseph Harris hadn't been perfect, quick-tempered, too trusting, proud, but he'd loved his family enough to let them hate him if it kept them safe. The parallel to his own life was too sharp to ignore. He'd run too, not from sacrifice, but from expectation, from the fear of becoming either the father who'd left or the mother who'd stayed. In running from both, he'd become neither, just a man drifting between other people's lives. By the time he returned home, soaked through and shivering, Ruby was on his porch with soup and fresh bread, as if summoned by some maternal magic. "You look like a drowned cat," she said, ushering him inside.
What were you thinking? Riding in this weather?
He wanted to tell her everything, to share the weight of truth, but the words tangled in his throat. Instead, he let her fuss over him, building up the fire, heating soup, finding dry clothes that had been his father's and still fit well enough. "My mother lied to me," he said finally, staring into the fire. "For 11 years, she let me believe something that wasn't true." Ruby settled beside him, close enough for comfort but not crowding. Did she lie, or did she carry a truth too heavy for a boy's shoulders? "Is there a difference?"
All the difference in the world.
Ruby's voice was gentle but firm.
A lie seeks to deceive. What your mother did sought to protect. The outcome might feel the same,
but the heart behind it matters, Gabriel told her then, the whole story spilling out like water through a broken dam. Ruby listened without interrupting, her presence steady as stone. When he finished, they sat in silence broken only by the fire's crackle and the rain's steady drum. "Your father sounds like a man who loved imperfectly but truly," she said finally. "And your mother sounds like a woman who protected you the only way she knew how." Neither was wrong. Neither was entirely right. They were just human, doing their best with impossible choices. "I hated him for so long," Gabriel admitted. "Built my whole life on that hatred, on not being him. And now I don't know who to be." Ruby touched his hand, her fingers warm against his cold ones. "Maybe that's the gift in all this. You get to choose who to be, not in reaction to lies or in rebellion against ghosts, but as yourself, Gabriel Harris, whoever he decides that is." The rain continued through the night. Ruby stayed, making tea, sitting with him as he sorted through the papers again, piecing together the full story of his family's trials. She helped him see patterns he'd missed: his mother's strength in fighting Hollingsworth legally, his father's courage in choosing shame over his family's ruin. "They both sacrificed for you," Ruby observed as dawn approached, the rain finally stopping. "Different sacrifices, but born of the same love. Maybe it's time to stop running from that love and start living up to it." Gabriel looked at her, this woman who'd appeared in his life like grace itself, bringing comfort and challenge in equal measure. "How do I do that?" "By staying," she said simply. "By building something worth protecting. By being the man they believed you could be, even when they couldn't show you how." As the sun broke through the clouds, Gabriel felt something break inside him too, not destructive, but cleansing, like the storm washing the dust from the world. He'd come home to bury his mother and found instead a resurrection of sorts, a chance to understand the past and choose his future. The watch on the table had stopped at 3:17, marking an ending. But somewhere in the house, His mother's clock still ticked, marking new moments, new possibilities. Time to stop living and stop time. Time to wind the watch and move forward. "Will you help me?" he asked Ruby. "To figure out who Gabriel Harris is when he's not running." She smiled, and in that moment, she looked like hope itself. "I thought you'd never ask." The morning sun slanted through the kitchen window, illuminating the sawdust in Gabriel's hair as he measured planks for new porch railings. 2 weeks had passed since the truth about his father had upended everything he'd believed, and in that time, the house had become his anchor and his purpose. "You're cutting that board too short," Ruby observed from the doorway. A basket of preserves in her arms, she'd taken to stopping by most mornings, always with something from her father's house or the neighbor's food, tools, advice, and increasingly, just her presence. Gabriel paused, rechecked his measurements, and grimaced. She was right. "How do you know about carpentry?" "My grandfather was a shipwright in Baltimore before he came west. He taught me to measure twice, cut once, and never trust a man who eyeballs his measurements." She set the basket down and picked up his pencil, correcting his marks with practiced ease. "You're distracted today." He was. The letter from the ranch in Colorado had arrived yesterday, acknowledging his resignation but also making an offer trail boss for a cattle drive to Montana. Good money, respected work. A month ago, he'd have been halfway packed already. "Just thinking," he said, cutting along her corrected line. Ruby studied him with those direct eyes that seemed to see through his evasions. "Thinking about staying or thinking about leaving?" "Is it that obvious? You get a particular look when you're feeling caged, like a Mustang eyeing the corral gate." She began unpacking the preserves, arranging them on the repaired shelves with careful precision. "What's pulling at you?" Instead of answering directly, Gabriel led her outside to see the work he'd completed. The chicken coop, rebuilt and reinforced. The garden beds, turned and ready for spring planting. The barn doors, rehung and true. Each repair was a small promise to stay, yet the wanderlust still whispered in quiet moments. "Ma used to say idle hands were the devil's workshop," he said, running his hand along a newly mended fence rail. "But I wonder if she had it backward. Maybe busy hands are just a way to avoid thinking too hard." Ruby leaned against the fence beside him, her shoulder barely reaching his. "Or maybe they're a way of thinking with your whole self, not just your mind. Your hands know things your head hasn't figured out yet." "And what do my hands know?" "Look around," she said simply. "Every board placed true, every nail driven home. These aren't the repairs of a man planning to leave. These are the works of someone planting roots, even if he doesn't realize it yet." They walked the property together, Ruby pointing out things he'd missed where his mother had planned to expand the herb garden, the apple trees that needed pruning, the perfect spot for a greenhouse if he was inclined. Her knowledge of the place was intimate, born of those Thursday afternoon visits that had shaped them both. "She talked about you while we worked," Ruby said, stopping beneath the cottonwood tree. "Not constantly, but in the way you mention weather or seasons natural, inevitable. Gabriel loved climbing this tree. Gabriel helped me plant those roses. You were woven into every story of this place." "I wasn't here," he said, the familiar guilt rising. "Whatever she told you, I wasn't here for 8 years." "No," Ruby agreed. "But you were never gone. Not really. She carried you with her the same way she carried your father's memory, not as a burden, but as a part of herself." They returned to find visitors Sam Henderson and his wife Martha, carrying lumber and a ladder. Word had spread about Gabriel's repair work, and neighbors had begun appearing with supplies and assistance, determined to help Ellen Harris's son the way she'd helped them. "Heard you were fixing the place up," Sam said, already unloading boards. "About time someone got that roof proper before winter. I owe your mom more than I can repay, but I can swing a hammer well enough." Before Gabriel could protest, more neighbors arrived. Tom Garrett with nails and shingles, the widow Chen with food for the workers, young Timothy Hendricks eager to help and learn. The individual work became communal, the house transforming under many hands. Ruby organized it all with quiet efficiency, directing food to the kitchen, assigning tasks based on skill, keeping the children occupied and out from underfoot. Gabriel watched her orchestrate the chaos with the same grace his mother had shown, turning individual efforts into community. "Your ma did this for us," Martha Henderson said, working beside Gabriel to replace rotted boards. "When our barn burned, she had the whole town here before the ashes cooled. Many hands make light work," she'd say. But it was more than that. It was about knowing you weren't alone in the world. As the day wore on, Gabriel found himself swept into the rhythm of shared labor. Stories flowed with the work memories of his mother, tales of his father before the troubles, gossip about current town doings. He learned that Mary Sullivan had indeed married, to a banker from Denver, and was miserable with wealth. That Hollingsworth had died 2 years back, unmourned and unloved. That the town was growing, needing skilled hands and honest hearts. "You staying on, then?" Tom Garrett asked during a water break, his tone carefully casual. "Town could use a man who knows horses. Old Murphy's been talking about retiring from the livery." "I haven't decided," Gabriel admitted, though the Colorado letter seemed to grow heavier in his pocket. "Well," Tom said, "decisions have a way of making themselves if you let them. Just watch which way your feet point when you're not thinking." By evening, the roof was patched, the porch solidly repaired, and the house looked cared for in a way it hadn't since his father left. The workers departed with thanks and promises to return if needed, leaving Gabriel and Ruby alone in the transformed space.
"This is what she did, isn't it?"
Gabriel asked, surveying the improvements. "Turned individual needs into community connections."
"She understood something important,"
Ruby said, beginning to clean up the kitchen. "That helping others helps yourself. That building community builds your own foundation. That roots grow strongest when they intertwine with others." Gabriel pulled out the Colorado letter, setting it on the table between them. Ruby glanced at it but didn't comment, continuing her work with studied calm. "It's a good offer," he said. "Trail boss to Montana. Respected work, good pay. The kind of job I've been working toward for years."
"It sounds perfect for the man you were,"
Ruby observed, drying dishes with careful attention. "And for the man I am." She turned to face him fully then, her expression serious. "That's not for me to say, but I'll tell you what your mother told me once. She said the hardest part of loving someone wasn't letting them go. It was letting them choose to stay. She never asked you to come home because she wanted it to be your choice, not your obligation."
"And if I choose to go?"
Ruby's composure cracked slightly. A flash of something disappointment hurt crossing her features before she smoothed it away. "Then I'll pack you food for the journey and wish you well, because that's what friends do." Friends. The word sat wrong. Too small for what had grown between them in these weeks of shared grief and gradual healing. But Gabriel wasn't ready to name it something else, not with one foot still pointing toward the horizon. "I need to think," he said. "Then think," Ruby replied, gathering her things. "But while you're thinking, remember this Montana will still be there next year, and the year after. But moments like today, surrounded by people who care about you, working to build something lasting, those don't come around as often as you'd think." After she left, Gabriel walked through the house, seeing it with new eyes. Every repair spoke of permanence, of investment in tomorrow. His hands had made choices his mind was still debating. In the barn, he found the saddle his mother had saved, running his fingers over the worn leather. It would serve for another season of drifting, or it could stay here, hung in its place, ready for different kinds of rides. He thought about his father, choosing exile to save his family, about his mother, choosing to stay and build a life from the ashes of loss. Both had sacrificed, in different ways, for love. What was his choice to be? The next morning, Gabriel found Ruby in her garden, tending late-blooming roses with the same care she brought to everything. She looked up at his approach, her expression carefully neutral. I wrote to Colorado, he said without preamble, thanked them for the offer but declined, told them I had roots to tend here. The smile that bloomed across Ruby's face was worth more than any trail boss salary. Your mother would be glad, she said simply. I'm not doing it for her, Gabriel clarified. I'm doing it for me. For the first time in 8 years, I want to see what grows when I stay in one place. When I stop running from ghosts and start building with neighbors. When I let myself care about tomorrow beyond where I'll bed down. Ruby stood, dirt on her hands and joy in her eyes. That sounds like wisdom earned the hard way. Maybe I'm just tired of my own company on cold nights. He reached out, brushing a smudge of soil from her cheek. Ruby Wilson, would you have dinner with me tonight, not as my mother's friend bringing charity to the grieving son, but as yourself, with a man who's finally ready to learn what staying means? Her hand covered his, warm despite the autumn chill. I thought you'd never ask. That evening, as they shared a meal in the kitchen where his mother had taught Ruby to cook, where his father had carved his initials in the table, where 3 generations of Harris family had broken bread and built life, Gabriel felt the last of his wanderlust settle into something new. Not trapped, but rooted. Not caged, but home. Outside, the Hendricks boy was practicing his letters on the porch steps, using the primer Ellen Harris had given him. The sound of careful concentration, a future growing from seeds planted with patient hands, filled the air with promise. What are you thinking? Ruby asked, watching him listen to the scratching pencil. That maybe Ma was right about idle hands, Gabriel said. But she was more right about busy hearts, about filling your life with so much purpose that there's no room for running. Ruby reached across the table, taking his hand, work roughened meeting work roughened. Strength recognizing strength. Welcome home, Gabriel. Really home this time. And for the first time in 8 years, he believed it might be true. The Harvest Festival Committee met in the church hall on a crisp Thursday evening. 6 women and 2 men gathered around a table covered with lists, fabric samples, and previous year's notes. Gabriel sat at the far end, feeling out of place among the organizing energy. Present only because Ruby had asked, and because his mother's name was still attached to several traditional duties. Ellen always managed the apple booth. Mrs. Patterson was saying, consulting her ledger. Cider, apple butter, those wonderful dried rings she made. I don't suppose... She looked hopefully at Gabriel. I can provide apples, he said, thinking of the laden trees. But I don't know the first thing about apple butter. I do, Ruby interjected smoothly. Mrs. Harris taught me her recipe 2 years ago. Gabriel and I can manage it together. The way she said together sent an unexpected warmth through him. Over the past weeks, that word had become comfortable between them, working together, eating together, simply being together in companionable silence. Excellent. Mrs. Patterson made a note. Now, about the dance. Mr. Thompson, you'll provide the music as usual. The fiddler nodded, already tapping his foot to some internal rhythm. Got a few new tunes this year. Heard them from a traveling fellow. Lively ones. Nothing too scandalous, Mrs. Clark warned. Last year's polka nearly gave Reverend Matthews apoplexy. The Reverend needs to loosen his collar. Old Murphy chuckled. A little lively stepping never hurt anyone. Speaking of which, he turned to Gabriel. You planning to attend this year? The last harvest dance Gabriel had attended. He'd been 19 and full of vinegar, sneaking flask whiskey behind the church and picking fights with the Garrett boys. The memory stung. I'll be there, he said quietly. Different man than before. Good to hear it. Murphy's eyes twinkled. Might want to practice your steps. Heard tell Miss Wilson's dance card fills up fast these days. Ruby blushed prettily, but her chin lifted. I save dances for partners who ask properly. Mr. Murphy. Assumptions lead to disappointed feet. The meeting continued with assignments and arrangements. Who would bring what? Who would set up where? Endless details that had seemed to magically arrange themselves when Gabriel was young. Now he understood the careful orchestration behind community celebrations, the invisible hands that created visible joy. Walking Ruby home afterward, he found himself uncharacteristically nervous. "I should warn you," he said as they passed beneath the gas street lamps. "I haven't danced in 8 years, unless you count dodging saloon brawls."
"Dancing's like riding,"
Ruby replied. "Your body remembers even when your mind forgets. Besides, it's not about perfect steps. It's about moving together, finding rhythm." She paused at her gate, lamplight catching gold in her hair. "Will you ask me properly? Gabriel Harris? Or should I expect to stand by the punch bowl all evening?" He took her hand, feeling bold. "Miss Wilson, would you honor me with a dance, maybe 2? If I don't tread on your feet, I'll save you 3, she said, squeezing his fingers. "1 for who you were, 1 for who you are, and 1 for who you are becoming." The next weeks flew by in preparation. Gabriel found himself drawn into the community's rhythm, no longer an observer but a participant. He helped Sam Henderson build booth frames, painted signs with the school children, hauled tables and benches with the other men. Each task wove him deeper into the fabric of town life. The apple preparation became an event itself. Ruby arrived early on a Saturday, armed with baskets and determination. They worked side by side in the kitchen, peeling and coring while the house filled with the scent of cinnamon and cloves. "Your mother added just a touch of maple syrup," Ruby said, stirring a massive pot of apple butter. "Said it was her secret. That and patience can't rush good apple butter." Gabriel watched her work, sleeves rolled up, a streak of applesauce on her cheek, completely at home in his mother's kitchen. No, in what was becoming their kitchen. He realized, somewhere in the past weeks, she'd become part of the house's rhythm, her presence as natural as morning light. "You're staring," she said without looking up from the stove. "Just thinking." "Dangerous habit." But she smiled. "What about—" "How Ma would have loved this. You here, using her recipes, filling the house with purpose again." He paused, then added more quietly, "How I love it too." Ruby's stirring slowed, but she kept her eyes on the pot. "Careful, Mr. Harris. A girl might read meaning into words like those." Maybe she should. The afternoon took on a charged quality, awareness crackling between them like static before a storm. They worked in tandem, communicating in glances and half smiles, hands brushing as they reached for the same tool. By evening, rows of jars lined the counter, golden apple butter catching the light like captured sunshine. "We make a good team," Ruby observed, surveying their work. "We do," Gabriel agreed, then took a breath. "Ruby, these past weeks..." Gabriel Harris. Young Timothy Hendricks burst through the door without knocking, face flushed with excitement. "Come quick, there's a mare down at Murphy's, having trouble foaling. Mr. Murphy says you know horses better than anyone." The moment broke. Ruby waved him on. "Go, I'll finish cleaning up. Save a life first, declarations later." He wanted to protest, but Timothy was already tugging him toward the door. "Hurry, she's been laboring for hours." The mare was indeed in distress, a beautiful sorrel twisted with pain. Gabriel forgot everything else, focusing on the animal's need. He'd helped dozens of difficult births on the trail, knew the delicate balance between intervention and patience. "Easy, girl," he murmured, running practiced hands over her swollen sides. "Let's see what's troubling you." The foal was turned wrong, a dangerous position for both mother and baby. Gabriel rolled up his sleeves, speaking softly to keep the mare calm as he worked. The crowd that had gathered fell silent, watching him operate with gentle confidence. It took 2 hours, careful manipulation, and every trick he'd learned from old cowboys who'd forgotten more about horses than most men ever knew. But finally, with a rush and a cry, the foal slipped free a perfect filly. dark as her mother with a white star on her forehead.
You did it,
Timothy breathed, eyes wide with wonder as the filly struggled to her feet. She did it, Gabriel corrected, stroking the exhausted mare's neck.
I just helped her remember how.
Murphy clapped him on the back with enough force to stagger him. Boy, you've got the gift. Your daddy would be proud he was good with horses too, but not this good. Town's lucky to have you back. The crowd dispersed slowly, everyone wanting to see the new filly take her first wobbly steps. Gabriel stayed until both mother and baby were stable, teaching Timothy how to check vital signs and what to watch for in the coming days. It was full dark when he finally headed home, tired but satisfied. He found Ruby on his porch, wrapped in a shawl, waiting. Successful delivery, she asked. Mother and baby doing fine. He sat beside her on the steps, suddenly aware of how he must look and smell. Sorry about earlier. What I was trying to say.
Can wait,
Ruby interrupted gently. Tonight proved something more important than any declaration.
What's that?
That you're not just staying, you're belonging. Did you see their faces? You're not Ellen's boy who ran off anymore. You're Gabriel Harris who saves horses, who helps neighbors, who's becoming part of things again. She stood, brushing off her skirts. Your mother always said you had healing hands. Nice to see you finally believing it. She left him there to think, which seemed to be her way, dropping wisdom like seeds and letting them grow in their own time. Gabriel sat long into the night, listening to the town settle around him. From Murphy's stable, he could hear the occasional whinny of the new filly. From the saloon, faint music and laughter. From somewhere closer, a mother singing her child to sleep. The night of the harvest festival arrived crisp and clear, with the kind of sky that made the stars look close enough to touch. Gabriel dressed carefully in his father's best suit, altered by Widow Chen to fit his broader shoulders. Looking in the mirror, he saw echoes of the man in the old photographs, but also himself, shaped by different choices. The town square transformed at dusk lanterns strung between posts, booths arranged in cheerful chaos, the smell of roasted corn and cider spicing the air. Gabriel manned the apple booth with Ruby, watching the town gather in celebration. Their apple butter sold quickly, each jar a small victory of planning and partnership. Save me a jar, Doc Wilson requested, sampling the wares. Haven't tasted apple butter this good since Ellen's last batch. You two did her proud. As darkness fell, Thompson's fiddle called everyone to the dancing ground. Gabriel watched couples form up for the first reel, his courage temporarily deserting him. Second thoughts, Ruby asked, appearing at his elbow in a dress of deep blue that made her eyes look like midnight. Third and fourth thoughts, he admitted. What if I've forgotten how?
Then we'll learn together.
She held out her hand.
That's what partners do.
He took her hand, let her lead him to the floor as Thompson struck up a familiar tune. And she was right, his body did remember. More than that, it remembered how to move with another person, to read the subtle signals of shift and sway, to create something beautiful from simple steps. They danced the first dance carefully, finding their rhythm, the second with more confidence. Gabriel spinning her under his arm to delighted laughter. By the third, they moved as one, the rest of the world falling away until there was only music and motion and the woman in his arms. You're smiling, Ruby observed as they paused between songs. Am I? But he knew he was, for the first time in longer than he could remember. He felt purely happy, not chasing it or running from its absence, but simply inhabiting joy. Gabriel, Ruby began, then stopped, looking over his shoulder. You have an admirer. He turned to find Timothy Hendricks, scrubbed and polished in his Sunday clothes, clutching the primer Gabriel's mother had given him. Mr. Harris, the boy said formally. I finished it, the whole book, every word, and I've been teaching my sister, like I promised. His young face shone with pride. Mrs. Harris was right, books do make your light shine brighter. Gabriel's throat tightened. He knelt to the boy's level.
She'd be so proud of you.
Timothy, tell you what tomorrow. You come by the house. I've got some other books that need a bright young man to read them. The boy scampered off, glowing. Gabriel stood to find Ruby watching him with soft eyes. What? He asked.
Nothing, just seeing your mother in you. The way you just lit up that boy's world with a few words and a promise.
She stepped closer.
Dance with me again. Gabriel, this time,
let's not count the songs. They danced until the lanterns burned low and the musicians grew hoarse. Around them, the town celebrated Harvest Home, the gathering in, the gratitude for abundance, the promise of community through winter's dark. Gabriel held Ruby close, marveling at how absence had become presence, how running had become staying, how alone had become together.
I love you,
he said quietly, the words surprising him with their certainty. I should have said it weeks ago, but I love you, Ruby Wilson. She smiled up at him, tears making stars of her eyes. I know. I've been waiting for you to catch up to what your hands have been saying all along. Every repair, every planted seed, every moment you chose to stay, they all said love.
Is that a yes? That's a dance with me forever, Gabriel Harris. That's a build a life with me. That's a your mother knew what she was doing when she sent me to your door.
They kissed then, there in the middle of the dance floor with half the town watching and the other half pretending not to. Thompson's fiddle sang approval, and someone, probably old Murphy, whooped with delight. Later, walking home through streets littered with festival remnants, Gabriel felt the last piece of himself click into place. He was no longer the angry boy who'd run, no longer the drifter seeking meaning in distance. He was a man who'd found his way home, not just to a place, but to a purpose, not just to a house, but to a heart that made it home. Stay with me, he said at her gate, not wanting the night to end.
Just sit with me, talk with me, be with me a little longer.
She smiled, understanding as always.
For a little longer tonight, for a lot longer starting tomorrow, for as long as you'll have me.
They sat on his porch, her head on his shoulder, watching the stars wheel overhead. In the stable, the new filly whinnied, testing her voice. From the houses around them, the sounds of families settling after celebration. And there on the porch his mother had loved, with the woman she'd chosen for him. Gabriel Harris finally understood what it meant to be home. The morning after the harvest festival dawned bright and unseasonably warm. What Gabriel's mother used to call borrowed time, nature's gift before winter's arrival. He found Ruby already in his kitchen, humming as she mixed biscuit dough, as natural there as breathing. You're up early, he said, pausing in the doorway to watch her work. Morning light through the window caught the flour dust in the air like tiny stars.
Couldn't sleep,
she admitted, not turning around.
Too much happiness. I think, like trying to hold sunshine in your hands, you want to grip tight, but know you need to let it flow.
He crossed to her, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. We have time now. No need to grip anything too tight. She leaned back against him, and they stood there for a moment, finding their new rhythm. Then Ruby's practical nature reasserted itself.
Gabriel Harris,
unless you want burned biscuits, you'll let me work.
Why don't you see to the horses? I heard Murphy's new filly crying for her breakfast.
The simple domesticity of it being shooed from his own kitchen, having someone to share morning chores with, filled him with quiet joy. He kissed her flour-dusted cheek and headed to the stable, whistling. The work of the ranch had taken on new meaning. Each repaired fence post, each groomed horse, each small improvement was no longer just maintaining his mother's legacy, but building something forward. Murphy had been serious about retiring from the livery, and they'd begun discussing Gabriel taking over some of the work boarding horses, doctoring when needed, maybe even breeding good stock. You've got the touch, Murphy had said. And more important, you've got the patience. Horses know when a man's running from something. They settle better for a man who's settled himself. Now, checking on the mare and filly. Gabriel felt that settling deep in his bones. The filly nursed strongly, her mother watching with calm eyes. He'd helped bring this new life into the world, would watch her grow, maybe train her himself. The continuity of it, the promise of tomorrows, no longer frightened him. Mr. Harris. Timothy Hendricks appeared at the stable door, practically vibrating with excitement. "Did you mean it about the books?"
I did, but first, want to learn about horses?
The boy's eyes widened. "Really?" Gabriel spent the next hour teaching Timothy basic horse care, how to approach slowly, where to check for heat or swelling, the proper way to hold a brush. The boy absorbed it all with the same intensity he'd brought to his letters, asking questions that showed real understanding. "Your ma would have liked this," Timothy said suddenly, carefully brushing the mare's flank. "She always said teaching was just sharing what you love with someone who wants to learn." From the mouths of babes, Gabriel thought. She was right. Speaking of which, let's go find those books. They returned to the house to find Ruby and Doc Wilson on the porch, heads bent over papers. Her father looked up with a peculiar expression, part pleasure, part concern. "Gabriel, good. We need to discuss something."
"Papa,"
Ruby warned, but he waved her off. "No, this needs saying. Gabriel, I'm not getting younger. This town's growing, and I can't keep up with all the doctoring needs anymore. I've written to a colleague in Denver about sending his nephew newly trained, eager to prove himself, but he'll need help getting established. Needs someone who knows the town, who people trust." Gabriel frowned, not following. "What's that got to do with me?" Ruby sighed. "What Papa's dancing around is that he wants to train you as his assistant. Basic doctoring, setting bones, birthing babies, tending wounds. The things you already do with horses. But for people—" "I'm no doctor," Gabriel protested automatically. "Neither was I when I started," Doc Wilson said firmly. "Just a man who read books and wasn't squeamish about blood. You've got steady hands, a calm manner, and people already come to you when animals are hurt. Wouldn't be such a leap to help when their children are." The idea was so unexpected, Gabriel couldn't form a response. Timothy, still clutching the horse brush, piped up. "You'd be good at it, Mr. Harris. You knew just what to do with the mare, and you didn't get flustered when everyone was watching and worrying." "The boy's got a point," Doc Wilson continued. "Think about it. Winter's coming, good time for reading, learning. Ruby knows a fair bit herself from helping me. Between the three of us, we could give this town what it needs." After they left Timothy with an armload of books, Doc Wilson with a promise to discuss it further, Gabriel sat on the porch steps, overwhelmed by possibility. "It's too much," he said to Ruby. "The horses, the ranch, now doctoring. A month ago I was nobody, just drifting. Now everyone seems to think I'm the answer to their problems." Ruby settled beside him, taking his hand. "Not the answer, just someone willing to help. There's a difference." She paused, choosing her words. "Your mother saw needs and filled them. Not because she thought she was special, but because she was there and able. That's all anyone's asking of you."
"What if I'm no good at it? What if someone gets hurt because I didn't know enough?"
"Then you'll learn and do better next time. Papa's lost patience, it nearly broke him sometimes. But he saved more than he lost, helped more than he failed. That's all anyone can do." They sat quietly, watching the town go about its Saturday business. Widow Chen hanging laundry, the Henderson children playing in the street, old Murphy teaching a young man about wagon repair. Ordinary people living ordinary lives, trusting each other with the small faiths that built community. "I want to show you something," Ruby said suddenly, pulling him to his feet. She led him through town to the cemetery, but not to his family plot. Instead, she stopped at a newer section, where a small stone marked Baby Wilson, beloved daughter, 1869.
"My sister,"
Ruby said quietly.
"She lived 3 days.
My mother never recovered from the birth, lingered for months before following her. She knelt, brushing leaves from the stone.
I was 12, old enough to understand loss, too young to know what to do with it.
Gabriel knelt beside her, understanding flooding through him. That's when my mother started visiting. Every day at first, teaching me to cook so Papa would eat, teaching me to sew so our clothes stayed mended, teaching me to be strong so I could hold what was left of our family together. Ruby's voice was steady, but tears tracked down her cheeks.
She saved us, Gabriel, not dramatically, not with grand gestures, just by showing up day after day until we remembered how to save ourselves. And now you're saving me the same way.
Ruby smiled through her tears. I'm trying, though you're considerably more stubborn than I was at 12. They walked back through town slowly, Gabriel seeing it all with new eyes, not as a place he'd fled from or been dragged back to, but as a living thing that required tending. The doctor's suggestion no longer seemed impossible, but inevitable, another way to root himself in the soil of community. I'll do it, he decided aloud. Learn what Doc Wilson wants to teach, not to be special or save everyone, just to help where I can. Ruby squeezed his hand. Your mother would be proud. I'm not doing it for her. I'm doing it for Timothy, who deserves adults who stick around. For Murphy, who's getting too old to handle everything alone. For the next family that needs help when a baby won't come easy. He stopped walking, turning to face her. For us, for the family we'll have someday. The children who'll need a father who builds instead of runs. Ruby's breath caught.
Gabriel Harris, are you proposing?
Not yet, he said, grinning at her expression. When I propose, you'll know it. There'll be a ring and probably some fumbling with words.
This is just declaration of intent. Fair warning that I'm planning a future that has you at the center of it.
Well then, she said, composing herself with visible effort. I suppose I should warn you that I'm planning the same, though I'll likely be better with the words when the time comes. They were laughing when they reached the house, finding a familiar horse tied at the gate. James Crawford. Gabriel's friend from the Colorado ranch stood on the porch looking uncomfortable in town clothes.
Jim,
Gabriel clasped his hand warmly.
What brings you here?
Curiosity, mostly. Jim's eyes traveled between Gabriel and Ruby, understanding dawning. Wanted to see what could make Gabriel Harris turn down the best trail boss position in 3 states. I see it now. Ruby Wilson. James Crawford, the man who taught me most of what I know about horses. Jim tipped his hat. Ma'am, though I'd say Gabriel knew plenty already. Just needed reminding sometimes. He turned back to Gabriel. Truth is, I'm heading to California. Heard about a ranch out there needs managing. Thought I'd stop by. See if you changed your mind about staying put. Not a chance, Gabriel said firmly. Found everything I need right here. Jim nodded, unsurprised. Figured as much. You look different, settled, like your edges found their places. He glanced around the well-tended property. Your ma's place. Mine now. Ours. Soon enough. Good for you. Jim's weathered face creased in a genuine smile. Always knew you'd stop running eventually. Just needed the right reason to stay. They spent the afternoon catching up, Jim sharing news from the trail, Gabriel showing off the improvements to the ranch. Ruby provided food and gentle teasing, drawing stories from Jim about Gabriel's wilder days that had them all laughing. He ever tell you about the time in Abilene? Jim asked, eyes twinkling. When he talked to Angry Ma about hanging a horse thief by offering to teach the man's son to read?
I did not,
Ruby said, delighted.
Gabriel Harris, you've been holding out on me.
Wasn't nothing, Gabriel muttered. Boy reminded me of someone, angry at the world, no one giving him a chance to be better. That's our Gabriel, Jim said fondly. Always seeing the good in folks, even when they couldn't see it themselves. Going to make a fine doctor. I'd bet.
How did you?
Saw Doc Wilson at the store, mentioned I was looking for you. He said you'd agreed to train with him. Jim stood, preparing to leave. It's good, Gabe. You finding your place, using all of yourself, not just the parts that fit on horseback. At the gate, Jim paused. You know, your PA would be proud. I know he left, but from what you've told me, he was trying to protect what mattered. You're doing the same, just different. Protecting by staying, building, being present. That's its own kind of courage. After Jim left, Gabriel stood at the gate watching dust settle in the road. Ruby joined him, slipping her hand into his.
Regrets?
She asked softly. None. The answer came quick and certain. For the first time in my life, I'm exactly where I want to be. Good, because I have plans for us. Gabriel Harris. Plans that involve a spring wedding, a house full of children, and growing old on this porch watching grandchildren play in that same yard. That's a lot of plans. I'm a planner. You'll get used to it. She tugged him toward the house. Now come help me with supper. Jim's stories gave me ideas about things I need to ask you. Should I be worried? Probably. But her smile was warm as the autumn sun. But I promise to love you through the embarrassment. As they cooked together, Gabriel thought about the threads that made a life, the leaving and returning, the breaking and mending, the running and finally staying. His mother had known what she was doing, sending Ruby to his door, not just matchmaking but lifeline throwing, offering him a way back to himself through another's steady presence. Tomorrow, he'd start learning with Doc Wilson. He'd continue working with the horses, teaching Timothy, building the ranch into something sustainable. He'd court Ruby properly, though they both knew how that story would end. He'd become the man this town needed, this woman deserved, that he'd always had the capacity to be. But tonight, he'd simply be grateful for second chances and stubborn women, for friends who traveled miles to see him settled, for boys eager to learn and old men willing to teach, for a mother's love that transcended death and a father's sacrifice finally understood. The sun set over Copper Creek, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. In the kitchen, Ruby laughed at something, the sound like music. From the stable came the contented sounds of horses settling for the night. And Gabriel Harris, prodigal son come home at last, finally understood that the greatest adventures weren't always about distance traveled but about depth discovered. Not about the horizons chased, but about the ground cultivated beneath your feet. You're wool gathering again, Ruby called from inside. These potatoes won't peel themselves. Coming, he answered, taking one last look at the town spread before him. His town now, his home, his future before going inside to the woman who'd helped him remember how to stay. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in early December, when frost painted the windows and Gabriel's breath clouded in the air as he fed the horses. The envelope bore the elaborate letterhead of Richardson and Associates, the law firm that had once saved his family's ranch from Hollingsworth's schemes. Ruby, who'd been having breakfast with him as had become their custom, watched his face change as he read. Bad news. Not bad, just unexpected. He handed her the letter. There's a ranch for sale in Texas. The Dusty Creek spread 2,000 acres. Good water, established operation. The owner's widow wants to sell to someone who'll maintain it properly, not break it up for farming. Richardson thinks I'd be perfect for it. Ruby read carefully, her expression neutral. It's a good opportunity, the kind of chance most men dream about. I'm not most men. Gabriel took the letter back, folding it decisively. Not anymore. You should at least consider it. No. The word came sharper than intended. He softened his tone. Ruby, I spent 8 years chasing opportunities, following every trail that promised something better than what I had. This, he gestured at the kitchen, the ranch beyond, her across from him. This is what I want. She studied him for a long moment. You're sure because I won't be the woman who held you back from your dreams? Gabriel moved around the table, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. You're not holding me back. You're holding me together. There's a difference. Still, she said against his shoulder,
You should write back. Thank them properly for thinking of you.
He did write back that very afternoon, declining with gratitude and recommending Jim Crawford for the position instead. As he sealed the letter, he felt the last chain to his wandering past break clean. The future he wanted was here, in this kitchen where his mother had taught Ruby her recipes, in this town that had welcomed him home, in the eyes of the woman who saw him whole. Winter arrived in earnest the next week, blanketing Copper Creek in snow that muffled sound and made the world feel smaller, closer. Gabriel split his days between the horses and his medical studies, surprised to find himself genuinely interested in Doc Wilson's teachings. "You've got the instincts," the doctor said one evening as Gabriel successfully set a trapper's broken arm. "Same principle as with animals, stay calm. Work quick but careful. Trust your hands." The trapper, teeth gritted against the pain, managed a laugh. "Rather have him than you. Doc, no offense, but his hands are steadier." "None taken," Doc Wilson replied cheerfully. "These old fingers have seen too many winters. Time for younger hands to take over some of the load." Word spread, as word did in small towns. Soon Gabriel found himself called to help with various ailments, a child's fever here, a badly cut hand there. Nothing that truly tested his limited skills, but each success built confidence and reputation. One snowy evening, as he and Ruby decorated the house for Christmas, she brought up the subject they'd both been dancing around.
"Papa asked when we're getting married,"
she said casually, hanging a wreath his mother had made years ago. "I told him spring seemed traditional." Gabriel nearly dropped the candles he was placing on the mantel.
"Did you now?"
"Unless you had other plans." She kept her back to him, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. He crossed to her, turning her gently to face him. "Ruby Wilson, I've been carrying your ring for 3 weeks, trying to find the perfect moment. Are you proposing to me?" Her eyes widened. "You have a ring. My mother's, well, my grandmother's originally. It's been burning a hole in my pocket while I tried to plan something romantic." He laughed, pulling her close. "Should have known you'd beat me to it."
"So ask me properly,"
she demanded, eyes bright with tears and laughter. "Right now, I don't need perfect moments, I just need you." Gabriel dropped to one knee right there in the parlor, pulling out the small velvet box he'd indeed been carrying everywhere. The ring was simple, a gold band with a single small diamond, worn smooth by years of hard work and honest love. "Ruby Wilson," he began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "You brought me back to life when I thought I was just coming home to bury the past. You showed me that staying still could be its own adventure, that building something could matter more than chasing horizons. Will you marry me? Will you help me turn this house into a home again? Will you let me love you the way my father loved my mother, imperfectly but completely?" "Yes," she said before he'd even finished, dropping to her knees with him. "Yes, to all of it. To spring weddings and winter nights. To babies who'll climb that cottonwood and children who'll track mud through this kitchen. To growing old on that porch swing and filling this house with so much life, the walls can barely contain it. Yes, Gabriel Harris. Always yes." The ring fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting all these years for her hand. They kissed there on the floor, laughing and crying in equal measure, the Christmas decorations forgotten in their joy. News of their engagement spread through Copper Creek like wildfire. Within days, the women of town had organized themselves into committees: flowers, food, dress, music. Gabriel watched in amused bewilderment as his simple life became the center of elaborate plans. "It's not just for us," Ruby explained one evening after a particularly intense session with Mrs. Patterson about table arrangements. "The town needs celebrations, needs to see happiness taking root. We're giving them hope that life goes on, that joy still finds a way." Christmas Eve brought unexpected drama. The Garrett's youngest, barely 2 years old, developed a fever that wouldn't break. Doc Wilson was 20 miles away, attending a difficult birth. The family sent for Gabriel in desperation. He arrived to find chaos, other children crying, parents frantic, the baby burning with fever. Everything Doc Wilson had taught him seemed to flee his mind for a moment. Then Ruby's hand touched his shoulder she'd followed, as he'd known she would, and calm descended.
"What do you need?"
she asked quietly. "Snow," he said, remembering. "Lots of it. And clean cloths. Willow bark tea if they have any." They worked together through the night, cooling the child's fever with snowpacks, coaxing willow tea between tiny lips, keeping vigil as the fever rose and finally, blessedly, broke. When dawn came on Christmas morning, the baby was sleeping peacefully. The crisis passed.
"You saved him."
"Mrs." Garrett wept, clutching Gabriel's hands. "Just like your ma saved my Tom that time. It's like she's still here, working through you." Walking home through the Christmas morning snow, Ruby tucked against his side. Gabriel felt the truth of those words. His mother's legacy lived on not in the things she'd left, but in the knowledge she'd shared, the connections she'd fostered, the love she'd planted that continued to bloom. The church service that morning took on special meaning. Reverend Matthews spoke of gifts given and received, of love that multiplied when shared, of the miracle of community. When he asked for testimonies of gratitude, half the congregation seemed to have something to say about Gabriel and Ruby, about hope renewed and futures brightening.
"Seems we're getting married whether we planned it or not,"
Ruby whispered during a particularly effusive testimony from Mrs. Clark about young love reviving the town's spirit. "Fine by me," Gabriel whispered back, "though I draw the line at Mrs. Patterson planning our wedding night." Ruby muffled her laugh in his shoulder, earning a stern look from Reverend Matthews that reminded Gabriel so strongly of his childhood that he nearly laughed himself. After church, they made rounds through town, visiting families and sharing Christmas greetings. At each house, they were fed treats and showered with wedding advice. Some of it practical, some of it embarrassing enough to make Ruby blush prettily. The day culminated at Doc Wilson's house, where he'd invited them for Christmas dinner. The table was beautifully set, but there was a melancholy to it. The empty chairs where Ruby's mother and sister should have been. The spaces that would never be filled. "I've been thinking," Doc Wilson said over dessert, "about legacies, about what we leave behind. Ellen left kindness planted so deep in this town it'll bloom for generations. My Martha left gentleness in Ruby that tempers her strength perfectly." He raised his glass. "To the ones we've lost, who make us who we are, and to the ones we've found, who make us who we're becoming." They toasted solemnly, but the mood lightened as Doc Wilson produced a fiddle. "Before you ask, yes, I play, no, not well, but it's Christmas and I'm slightly drunk on Mrs. Murphy's eggnog, so you'll suffer through it." He played old carols with more enthusiasm than skill while Gabriel and Ruby sang along, their voices blending in harmonies they were still discovering. When he switched to a waltz, Gabriel pulled Ruby to her feet, dancing her around the small parlor while her father played. "I love you," Gabriel said as they swayed.
"Have I mentioned that today?"
"Only a dozen times. I'm keeping count, planning to demand equal reciprocation." "I love you," he repeated, spinning her slowly.
"There's 13. I love you too,"
she laughed. "But I'm still 11 behind, so expect declarations at inconvenient times." Doc Wilson transitioned into silent night, and they stopped dancing to listen. Through the window, snow fell softly on Copper Creek, blanketing the town in peace. Gabriel thought about the journey that had brought him here, the anger and wandering, the grief and gradual healing, the love that had surprised him with its patient certainty.
"What are you thinking?"
Ruby asked, reading his contemplative mood.
"About gifts," he said, "about how the best ones come wrapped in ways we don't expect, loss that leads to finding, grief that opens us to joy, coming home to bury the past and discovering a future instead." "Very philosophical for Christmas night," she teased, but her eyes were soft. "What else?"
"That I can't wait to marry you. That spring feels too far away. That if Mrs. Patterson suggests one more flower arrangement. I might suggest eloping instead. Gabriel Harris. But she was laughing. You wouldn't dare deprive this town of its wedding? Watch me, he threatened, pulling her close. All I need is you, Reverend Matthews, and 2 witnesses. Everything else is just decoration. Liar. You want the whole town there, seeing you claim me properly. You want Timothy Hendricks reading scripture and Mr. Thompson playing his fiddle and everyone who knew your mother seeing her son finally settled and happy. She was right, of course. He did want that, the public declaration, the community witness, the continuation of tradition that would weave them even deeper into Copper Creek's fabric. January, Doc Wilson said suddenly, startling them both. They'd forgotten he was still there, dozily strumming his fiddle. Get married in January. Life's too short and winter's too long to wait for spring. Your mother would say the same. Gabriel, don't postpone joy. Gabriel looked at Ruby, seeing his own thoughts reflected in her eyes. January.
New Year's Day,
she said decisively. Start the year as we mean to go on together.
That's a week away.
Then we'd better tell Mrs. Patterson. She'll either have apoplexy or rise to the occasion magnificently. Ruby kissed him quickly.
My money's on magnificent.
This town loves a challenge almost as much as it loves a love story. And so it was decided. There in Doc Wilson's parlor on Christmas night, with snow falling and fiddle music drifting, not a proposal, but a promise. Not an ending, but a beginning. Not coming home, but making one. Later, walking Ruby home through the quiet streets, Gabriel marveled at how different the world looked when you knew your place in it. The same buildings, the same streets, but all of it his now in a way it had never been before. His to protect, to serve, to be part of. No regrets, Ruby asked at her gate. About Texas, about the chances you're passing up. The only thing I regret, Gabriel said firmly, is that it took me so long to realize what I was looking for. But maybe that's part of it. You can't recognize home until you've been away. Can't appreciate staying until you've done your running. Then I'm glad you ran, Ruby said, standing on tiptoes to kiss him. Because you ran in a circle that led you right back to me. Best circle I ever traveled, he agreed, holding her close in the snow-soft night. And come New Year's Day, I'm done with circles. Just straight lines from now on, you and me, and whatever comes next. Whatever comes next, she echoed, a promise and a prayer. I can hardly wait. The sun rose on a world transformed by spring's gentle hand. 5 years had passed since Gabriel Harris returned to Copper Creek for his mother's funeral. 5 years since Ruby Wilson had knocked on his door with soup and sympathy, changing the course of his life forever. Now, on this April morning, Gabriel stood on the same porch where he'd once wrestled with grief and guilt, watching his daughters chase chickens around the yard. Margaret and Ellen, the twins, had just turned 4, a perfect blend of their parents' features and temperaments. Margaret had his dark hair but Ruby's steady nature, while Ellen bore Ruby's honey-colored locks with his restless spirit.
Papa, look!
Ellen shrieked with delight as she cornered a particularly elusive hen.
I almost caught her.
Almost doesn't fill the egg basket, he called back, echoing words his own mother had said countless times. But keep trying, little bird. Ruby emerged from the house, wiping flour-dusted hands on her apron. Even after 5 years of marriage, the sight of her still made his heart skip. She moved with the same grace that had first caught his notice, though now it carried the quiet confidence of a woman who knew her place in the world and filled it completely. They'll sleep well tonight, she observed, watching Margaret join her sister's chicken chase with determined concentration. They'd sleep well anyway, Gabriel replied, pulling her against his side. They spent half the morning helping Doc Wilson organize his medicine cabinet, and the other half assisting me with the horses. It had become their routine, the girls learning at every opportunity, absorbing lessons from the entire town. Doc Wilson taught them to count using medicine bottles. Widow Chen showed them basic stitches on fabric scraps, And old Murphy, who'd lived to see Gabriel take over much of the livery work, let them name every new foal born in his stables. Speaking of Doc Wilson, Ruby said, a peculiar note in her voice. He stopped by while you were at the Hendricks place. Left something for you. She handed him an envelope, heavy with quality paper and official seals. Gabriel recognized the letterhead, the medical college in Denver where Doc Wilson had trained decades ago.
What's this about?
Read it. Inside, formal language outlined an opportunity Gabriel had never imagined. The college, in partnership with several frontier towns, was establishing a program to train rural medical practitioners, not full doctors, but skilled healers who could serve communities too small for university-trained physicians. Doc Wilson had recommended Gabriel, citing his 5 years of apprenticeship and natural ability. It's a 3-month program, Ruby said, watching his face carefully. You'd have to go to Denver, but when you came back, you'd have real certification, real credentials. Gabriel set the letter down, his mind spinning.
3 months away from you and the girls.
We'd manage, the same way your mother managed when your father left, except you'd be coming back with something to build on, not running toward an empty dream. Ruby took his hands.
Gabriel, you've delivered 12 babies in the last 2 years, set more bones than I can count, sat with the dying and eased their passing. You're already doing the work. This would just make it official.
What about the ranch, the horses? Sam Henderson's boy is old enough to help now. Been pestering you for work anyway. She smiled. We've built a life here, my love. But that doesn't mean we stop growing. Your mother would say that God opens doors for those brave enough to walk through them. Gabriel finished. It was one of Ellen Harris's favorite sayings, usually deployed when encouraging someone to take a chance on themselves. A commotion in the yard interrupted his thoughts. Timothy Hendricks, now 17 and Gabriel's unofficial assistant in both horse doctoring and human healing, came running up the path. Mr. Harris, come quick. There's been an accident at the mine cave-in. Doc Wilson's already there, but he sent me for you and supplies. The decision crystallized in that moment. Gabriel was needed not as someone playing at doctoring, but as a real healer with real skills that could save lives. The certification would make him better at what he was already called to do. Go, Ruby said simply, already moving to gather supplies. We'll talk about Denver later. Right now, go save who you can. The mine accident tested everything Gabriel had learned in 5 years of working beside Doc Wilson. 3 men trapped, 2 badly injured, 1 barely breathing. He worked through the night, setting bones, cleaning wounds, fighting for each life with the same determination he'd once brought to breaking wild horses. When dawn came, all 3 men lived. You've got the gift, Doc Wilson said as they finally headed home. Exhausted, but victorious. I can teach technique, but instinct that comes from somewhere deeper. Denver would polish what's already there. I'll go, Gabriel decided. After spring planting, before harvest, if Ruby agrees. Ruby suggested it, the old doctor admitted with a grin. Came to me last month. Wanted to know what opportunities existed for furthering your education. That wife of yours sees ahead like a chess player. Gabriel wasn't surprised. Ruby had always been the one with vision, seeing not just what was, but what could be. She'd seen potential in him when he'd seen only failure, had imagined a future when he could barely face the present. The weeks passed quickly after that decision. The town rallied around the plan with typical enthusiasm, Mrs. Patterson organized a fund to help with expenses. Murphy offered to board his horses at reduced rates while Gabriel was gone, and half the town promised to look after Ruby and the girls. The night before his departure, they held a gathering at the church. What started as a simple farewell dinner became a testament to how thoroughly Gabriel had woven himself into Copper Creek's fabric. People spoke of lives he'd touched, the difficult birth he'd managed when Doc Wilson was laid up with bronchitis, the fever he'd broken in the Garrett children again, the calm presence he'd provided during old Mr. Peterson's final hours. You came home to bury your mother, Reverend Matthews said. And instead, You've helped this town bury its fear of the future. Go with our blessing, and come back to us even better than you leave." That last night at home, after the girls were asleep, Gabriel and Ruby sat on the porch swing, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. The cottonwood tree whispered in the evening breeze, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack.
"I'll write every day,"
Gabriel promised. "You'll write when you can," Ruby corrected practically. "You'll be learning, not mooning over us. We'll be fine. I've got the whole town watching over us. And you know Margaret's already better with the chickens than you are."
"What if—"
"No what ifs," Ruby interrupted firmly.
"This is right, Gabriel, as right as you coming home was, as right as us finding each other. Some things you just know."
He pulled her close, marveling again at her strength. His mother had chosen well, sending Ruby to his door that first day. Or perhaps Ruby had chosen, recognizing in him what he couldn't see himself, not a drifter needing anchor, but a healer needing purpose. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Gabriel kissed his sleeping daughters, memorizing their peaceful faces. Margaret stirred, opening eyes that were pure ruby. "Papa going," she murmured. "For a little while, sweet girl, to learn how to help people better. Like Grandma Ellen helped people." The name still caught him sometimes, how naturally they spoke of the grandmother they'd never meet, but knew through countless stories. Just like Grandma Ellen. "Then you come back," Margaret said with 4-year-old certainty. "Always come back to home." "Always," he promised. At the stage depot, it seemed the whole town had gathered. Doc Wilson pressed medical texts into his hands. Murphy slipped him extra traveling money, and Timothy Hendricks solemnly promised to help with the horses and anything else needed. Ruby stood apart from the crowd, the twins holding her hands. She wore the blue dress from the Harvest Festival where they'd first danced, and Gabriel's throat tightened at the memory.
3 months,
she said when he reached her.
"Barely a season. We've weathered longer winters."
"I love you," he said, not caring who heard.
"Thank you for seeing what I couldn't,
for pushing me to be more than I thought possible."
"I love you too,"
she replied, standing on tiptoes to kiss him. "Now go learn everything they can teach you, so you can come back and teach us." The girls wrapped themselves around his legs, and he knelt to hug them properly. "Be good for Mama. Help with chores. Don't chase the chickens too much." "We be perfect," Ellen promised solemnly, which made Ruby laugh because Ellen's version of perfect usually involved at least minor chaos. As the stage pulled away, Gabriel watched his family grow smaller in the distance, Ruby straight-backed and strong, the girls waving enthusiastically. The town clustered around them. His community, his people, his purpose made manifest. 3 months later, he returned with certification papers and a head full of new knowledge. Ruby met him at the depot, the girls shrieking, "Papa!" and launching themselves at his legs. The town was there too, eager to welcome their healer home with new skills to share. "How was it?" Ruby asked as they walked home, each carrying a twin. "Educational, exhausting, enlightening." He shifted Ellen to his other arm. "But every night, I thought about this coming home to you, to them, to the life we've built. That's what made it bearable." "Just bearable," she teased. "Well, the certification's nice too, but mostly I missed my girls, all 3 of them." That night, after celebrations and stories, and the girls finally asleep in their beds, Gabriel and Ruby stood in the kitchen where it all began. The house buzzed with life children's drawings on the walls, toys scattered despite Ruby's best efforts, the smell of bread rising for tomorrow's breakfast. "No regrets?" Ruby asked, echoing her question from years before. Gabriel pulled her close, looking around the home they'd made. His mother's spirit lived on in every corner, in the kindness they practiced daily, in the children they were raising to serve others. His father's sacrifice had meaning now, teaching Gabriel that love sometimes meant hard choices, but always meant choosing family. "No regrets," he said firmly. "Only gratitude." For the journey that brought me home. For the woman who helped me stay. For the future we're building together. Outside, Copper Creek settled into sleep, peaceful and prosperous. The boy who'd run from expectations had become the man who exceeded them. The drifter who'd feared connection had found his deepest joy and roots. The son who'd come home for a funeral had discovered life in its fullest measure. "Come to bed," Ruby said, tugging his hand. "Tomorrow's full enough sick horses, teething babies, and I promised to teach the Henderson girl to make apple butter using your mother's recipe." "Our life," Gabriel said, following her upstairs to the room where his parents had loved and argued and dreamed, where his children had been conceived and born, where he'd finally learned that home wasn't a place you ran from or to, but a choice you made daily, a love you tended carefully, a gift you received with grateful hands. "Our life," Ruby agreed, and in those 2 words lived everything past sorrows transformed to present joys, future promises growing from seeds faithfully planted, and the certain knowledge that Gabriel Harris had finally, truly, completely come home. In the cottonwood tree, an owl called once before settling into watchful silence, and in the house on Maple Street, a family slept in peace, held safe by love that had traveled long roads to find its rest, and by the truth that sometimes the greatest adventures happen not in the leaving, but in the staying. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love, loss, and finding home in the American frontier. I hope Gabriel and Ruby's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine in the telling. I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss what this story meant to you. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850. Give this video a like and hit that hype button to help more listeners discover these stories of the Old West. Until next time, may you find your own way home, wherever that may be.